This train in Malaysia shock. What if I told you that one of the most beautiful train lines in Southeast Asia almost became the most expensive trap in Malaysian history? Not because of an engineering failure, not because of a natural disaster, but because of a contract, buried in fine print, that could have handed a foreign government control over a corridor running straight through the heart of Malaysia. This is the story of the East Coast Rail Link. And once you hear it, you'll never look at infrastructure projects the same way again. But wait, before we go any further, please subscribe so you never miss out on any of my essential content. Comment "I subscribe" below, and I will personally welcome you to our community. With that said, let's get into it. Let's start with the numbers because they will shake you. 688 kilometers of railway track, cutting through jungles, crossing rivers, connecting the east coast of peninsular Malaysia to the port of Klang on the west. On paper, it sounded like a national dream, a lifeline for one of the most underserved regions in the country. The price tag? Initially quoted at Rm 55 billion, then revised to Rm 81 billion. That is roughly $16 billion US dollars for a single rail line. And here is where it gets deeply unsettling. Approximately 88% of that cost was to be financed through loans from the Export-Import Bank of China. The construction contract was awarded almost entirely to CCCC, China Communications Construction Company, a state-owned Chinese firm. Malaysian workers? Largely sidelined from their own national project. Now, you might think, okay, loans happen, large projects happen, but this is where the story stops being about trains and starts being about something much bigger. Meet Ahmad. He is 58 years old, a fisherman from a small village outside Kuantan, right along the projected rail path. When officials came knocking in 2017, they told him the railway would bring prosperity. New roads, new markets, a future for his children. What they did not fully explain was that his land his family had farmed for 3 generations, sat directly in the construction zone. The compensation process was slow, confusing, and deeply unequal. By the time Ahmad realized what had happened, the bulldozers were already clearing his neighbor's property. His story is not unique. It echoes across dozens of communities from Kota Baru to Kuala Lumpur. And it echoes even louder across other countries that accepted similar deals. Because here is what the ECRL agreement had in common with a pattern that researchers were already flagging across the world. In 2019, scholars from Harvard Kennedy School published a detailed analysis of Belt and Road Initiative contracts across 8 developing countries. What they found was alarming. Several contracts contained clauses that restricted borrowing nations from restructuring debt without lender approval. Some included collateral arrangements tied to national assets, ports, resource rights, land corridors. The most chilling case? Sri Lanka. After borrowing heavily from China to build the Hambantota port, a port that generated very little commercial traffic, Sri Lanka could not repay its debt. In 2017, they handed over the port to a Chinese state company on a 99-year lease. 99 years. Their own port. Gone. And Malaysia's ECRL had structural similarities that were impossible to ignore. That is when things got worse. By 2018, internal reviews of the ECRL contract were revealing terms that Malaysian economists described as extraordinarily unfavorable. The loan interest rates were above market average. The arbitration clauses were set in Chinese jurisdiction. And the construction terms essentially locked out Malaysian firms from a project being built on Malaysian soil. One economist quoted in The Edge Malaysia put it plainly, this was not just a loan. It was a dependency mechanism. Now here is where the story takes a turn that genuinely stunned the entire region. In May 2018, against nearly every political prediction, 93-year-old Mahathir Mohamad swept back into power. And one of his first acts in office? He flew to Beijing. He sat across from Chinese officials. And he said, "We cannot afford this deal as written. We need to renegotiate or cancel." The world watched. And China blinked. After months of tense negotiations, the ECRL deal was restructured. The project cost was slashed from Rm 81 billion to Rm 44 billion. That is a saving of Rm 37 billion, roughly $8 billion US dollars, secured by a man who was older than the country he was governing. It was a moment that sent a quiet but powerful message to every developing nation watching. Renegotiation is possible. Dependency is not inevitable. But here is the thing, and this is the part most people miss. Relief does not mean resolution. Even the renegotiated ECRL contract still carries currency exposure risk, because portions of the loan are structured in Chinese renminbi. If the ringgit weakens against the yuan, and currency markets are volatile, Malaysia's repayment burden grows automatically, without any new borrowing. And according to a 2022 World Bank report on infrastructure financing in developing economies, countries that accept large infrastructure loans with opaque contractual terms face a 34% higher likelihood of entering debt restructuring within the following decade. 34%. That is not a marginal risk. That is nearly 1 in 3. Now, I want to tell you about someone on the complete opposite end of this story. Because it is not all dark. Siti is 34 years old. A single mother living in Gombak, a suburb north of Kuala Lumpur. 4 years, her daily commute to her office job in KL Central took nearly 3 hours each way. Packed LRT carriages, broken escalators, 40-minute delays that were so routine she had set a separate alarm just to account for them. She told a local journalist something that stuck with me. She said, "I used to leave before my son woke up and come back after he was already asleep. I felt like a ghost in my own home." Then in 2023, the Putrajaya line, part of Malaysia's Klang Valley MRT expansion, extended service closer to her area. Her commute dropped to 47 minutes each way. For the first time in 4 years, she made it to her son's school recital. She sat in the front row. She cried the whole time. That is what functional public infrastructure actually means. Not just GDP projections. Not just trade corridors. It is a mother in the front row. And that is exactly why the stakes around the ECRL and Malaysia's broader rail ambitions are so deeply personal for millions of ordinary Malaysians. Because the ECRL, when complete, is projected to cut freight transport time between the east and west coasts from 8 hours to under 4. Economists at Pemandu Associates estimate it could contribute RM30 billion to Malaysia's GDP by 2035. If managed correctly. There is also a social equity dimension that rarely makes international headlines. The East Coast states, Kelantan, Terengganu, Pahang, are among Malaysia's poorest. They have long felt cut off from the economic energy of Kuala Lumpur and Penang. A reliable, affordable rail connection is not just logistics. It is dignity. But here is the hidden danger that almost no one is talking about right now. Even with the restructured contract and the reduced price tag, the ECRL construction is still behind schedule. Labor shortages, land acquisition delays, and post-pandemic supply chain disruptions have pushed completion estimates back multiple times. Every month of delay increases carrying costs on the loan. And those costs accumulate quietly, not in news headlines, but in national debt statistics that most citizens will never see until they feel the impact in public service cuts years from now. There is also a geopolitical undercurrent that is worth watching closely. As Malaysia deepens rail connectivity with its east coast, it simultaneously increases interdependence with Chinese construction firms, Chinese financing structures, and Chinese diplomatic expectations. In a region where the United States, Japan, Australia, and China are all actively competing for infrastructure influence, Malaysia's choices carry weight far beyond its own borders. This is what modern geopolitics looks like. Not tanks and warships, trains and contracts. So let me bring this all back to you. If you live in a developing country, or even a developed one, the story of the Malaysian rail is a mirror. It asks a question that should make every citizen uncomfortable. Do you know what is in the infrastructure contracts your government signs on your behalf? Ahmad did not know until the bulldozers arrived. Siti did not know how much her commute would cost her until she lost 4 years of her son's childhood. And Malaysia did not fully understand the ECRL's terms until an economist sat down and actually read the fine print. The trains are real. The development is real. But so is the debt. So are the clauses. So are the consequences. The difference between infrastructure that liberates a nation and infrastructure that binds it, is transparency. It is accountability. It is a government that negotiates in the interest of its people, not in the interest of the lender. And that requires citizens who are paying attention. So here is the question I want to leave you with today, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. If your government signed a deal like the original ECRL contract, would you even know about it? Or would you only find out when it was already too late? Drop your thoughts below. Because this conversation, right here, matters more than most people realize. And if this video opened your eyes to something you had never considered before, share it with someone who needs to see it. Not for the views, but because informed citizens build stronger nations. I'll see you in the next one.